The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Did I miss the start? I hope not.
I think that we
Welcome,
are.
everyone. Yep.
Okay.
And we'll start off. Ray Allen, I'm going to hand the mic off to you.
Okay.
And we'll get started. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mary. So I just wanted to welcome everyone to the FCD Prevention Works, the Parents in Prevention. So this is our second speaker that we've been able to host virtually, but we're glad to have Diana with us. She'll be able to introduce herself. She has a really she has a ton of experience, and we're really excited for her presentation tonight. And I just wanted to speak about a few things we have with our Norwich Prevention Council. So we work on prevention efforts and decreasing youth substance abuse in our community. And a couple things that we have available are some liquor stickers. These are a small sticker that will go over the top of a liquor bottle that you have at home, and basically it allows you to kind of track if those have been opened up. And it's just another way of like safeguarding it. While we do other things like compliance checks, and we work with local law enforcement officers to just engage them in different efforts. And if you're interested in any more work that we have with the Prevention Council, you can reach out to me, and we'll make my email available afterwards if you don't have that yet. But we're always looking to recruit new parents and community members and leaders. So I will turn it back over to you, Diana. You're all set.
Okay, thank you, Ray Allen, and thank you for inviting me and hosting me for our Parents in Prevention seminar. I am a prevention specialist with FCD Prevention Works, and it's my pleasure to introduce our organization and the work that we do, and talk to you about some recent student trends when it comes to alcohol and other drug use, and more importantly, talk about how parents can be involved in drug prevention efforts. So without further ado, I forgot to mention, if at any point you have any questions you would like answered, please feel free to just type in the chat box, and if I don't see it, my moderator will let me know, and I'm happy to answer any questions throughout the presentation at any point. So we'll start off by just introducing who we are. We are a nonprofit organization based out of Newton, Massachusetts, and we really are the leaders when it comes to school-based substance misuse prevention. We've been doing this work for just over 4 decades now in 70 countries on 5 continents, and we've seen over 2.5 million students. What makes FCD really unique and special, you may have heard, is our evidence-based approach. So everything we talk about is really rooted in science and research and data. And we are, all of us prevention specialists are also in long-term healthy recovery. So we have that element of personal experience. If you look at this photo that I have up, except for a few who work in our admin office, those are all the faces of people in recovery. And when I show this to your students, I often ask, what jumps out at you when you see this picture? And I'm told it's diverse. There's different genders, there's different ages, there's different ethnicities of people. And I asked, what does this tell you about substance misuse and addiction? And they say, it can happen to anybody, which is really the case. I think that when I was much younger, I failed to understand that. To me, it was like this very foreign concept that happened if you grew up with a lot of trauma, or maybe if parents were divorced, or if you just had a really, really hard life. And that wasn't really my story. I grew up with two loving parents. I had wonderful opportunities for education, and just through some decisions that I started making around the age of 16, one thing led to another. And by the time I was in my 20s, I was misusing alcohol and other drugs pretty frequently. All of this culminated in a drunk driving accident where I lost my best friend, which propelled me to get help for my alcohol and other drug issues. And I'm happy to say that that was almost 10 years ago. I've been in recovery for almost 10 years, and my life has changed a lot since then. And this job is just one of the many, many amazing gifts that recovery has given me. So this work is really personal for all of us prevention specialists at FCD, and even more so for me now. I have a 2-year-old and another one on the way, and so I truly understand how important it is to have accurate information when it comes to the health of our children and how to keep them safe and healthy. So we are evidence-based, we have personal experience in this topic, and we also have a large database of 130,000 student surveys. And what that means is when we go to certain schools, we collect student data and we're able to see student trends, but also draw correlations between parent influence and school climate, and come up with some really useful data from that. So I'll be sharing some information from those surveys in a little bit. We like to say that prevention is a climate and not a one-time program, meaning it really is a culture that you build and not just a one-off program or a one-off presentation, but it really involves everybody in the community. So what does that culture look like? It's a collaborative process, meaning, like I said, involves everybody in the community. And we really want to focus on 3 things in building this culture. Nurturing protections. So we want to build up the things that we know keep young people healthy. And that's caring adults, after school programs, alcohol and other drug education, and things like that. We want to reduce risks. We want to reduce the things that keep that put young people at risk for alcohol and drug misuse and other risky behaviors. And things like that could be misinformation, lack of information, having parents who aren't really involved in their kids' day-to-day lives. And I'll be talking more about specific risk factors in a couple of slides.
Diana?
And lastly, we want to, yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't think we're seeing your slides in presentation mode. We do see the slide deck, but not in presentation mode. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay, yes. I wonder why, because I did have it in presentation mode.
It might be, if you make it big like that, that will be perfectly fine. That's much better visual there. So that's great.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, so you see the tabs on the side, and
Yes.
then, okay. So I'm not sure. I did click presentation mode, but nothing happened. So I'll just keep presenting like this, if that's okay.
Yep. I think that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the heads up, Mary. Okay, and lastly, we want to intervene on unhealthy behaviors. So as a community, we want to decide on what an unhealthy behavior is and really feel empowered to speak up when we see something that concerns us, whether it's a parent about another student or a student about another student or faculty about another student. Really be able to identify those behaviors that concern us and speak up when we see them. So when we do these 3 things concurrently, this is how we really build the healthiest of communities. And that's what FCD means by prevention. So what exactly are we trying to prevent against? The definition of addiction is an individual's repetitive compulsive use of a substance or performance of a behavior despite negative consequences. So when a person's behavior has crossed over into repetitive compulsive behavior, meaning over and over again, this sort of inability to control oneself, and it's causing the person a lot of distress and negative consequences, that's when we typically say a behavior has become an addiction, whether it's drug related or it could be behavioral addictions like gambling. And when it comes to drug related addiction, we use the term substance misuse to describe any type of substance misuse, but addiction would be the most extreme end of substance misuse. And although we are obviously concerned, rightfully concerned, it's rightfully to be concerned about addiction, I also want to point out that when it comes to substance misuse, anything can happen, even through one-time misuse of a substance. And so we really want to prevent against addiction, but also any of those negative consequences that can result from one-time misuse, like an accident or problems with run-ins with the law, problems with law enforcement, and things like that. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to prevent against. And now, please allow me to talk a little bit about risk factors for substance use disorder, which is really just the formal name for addiction, how clinicians describe addiction. The first would be age of first use. So I don't need to tell you this, but your teens have a very unique brain. And what that means is that they have a very, very developed limbic system, that center for reward and pleasure. And so they're great at learning, especially learning the things that release dopamine, that is nature's way of telling them this is good, remember this behavior and do it again. So that part of the brain is very, very primed and ready to go. And the part of the brain not so developed is right up here, prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of our brain, as you all know, responsible for impulse control and decision making and future oriented thinking. So when you have these two dichotomies, that very hyper developed limbic center, that center for learning and pleasure, and an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, that really sets the stage for potential substance misuse. In other words, a drug is a lot more powerful in a teen. A psychoactive drug is a lot more powerful in a teenager's brain, and they don't really have the ability to moderate or control or think about their consequences in the same way an adult would, which makes them at much higher risk for developing a substance use disorder. In fact, research shows that when a person starts drinking at the age of 15, they have a 40% chance of developing an alcohol use disorder. But if they delay that decision, every year that they delay that decision, that probability goes down. And by the time they're 21, their risk of having a substance use disorder, if they start drinking at 21, is about 10%. And so age is a really big factor when it comes to risk for developing substance use disorder. The next risk factor is family history. So I'm sure you've all heard that there's a genetic component when it comes to addiction. And what that means is if you have addiction in your family, you're at much higher risk as well yourself. And researchers think that probably has something to do with dopamine receptors in the brain. So, so that drugs are more powerful in certain in the brains of certain people, and then that is also genetically passed down, that condition. So that's why they think those D2 receptors might be responsible for that genetic component when it comes to addiction. Environment is a big risk factor, obviously. How your family, family attitudes around drug use, behaviors, the community that you live in, who your peers are, the country that you live in, the attitudes when it comes to alcohol, marijuana, and nicotine use. These are all environmental factors. Mental health issues, that goes without saying. If you suffer from depression and anxiety, then you may use a substance to cope. Personality traits as well. So researchers have found there's a certain type of personality called a personality trait called sensation seeking. So people who are really into novelty and risk taking and sensation seeking, they are the people who love roller coasters and skydiving, but people like that are also at higher risk for using drugs and also potentially misusing them. Trauma, that goes without saying. If you're using alcohol and other drugs to cope. Members of the LGBTQ plus community, so not for any biological reasons, of course, but the unique pressures they may face with their identity or the social pressures they may face. So that's a population that is at higher risk as well. And finally, lack of information. If you don't have information, if you don't know that alcohol is a powerful psychoactive drug, for instance, then, that could also compound the problem. So once you start understanding risk factors, then you can really start to build a risk profile for your unique child, because everybody's different and everybody's risk when it comes to substance use disorder is going to be different. And once you understand your child's unique risk, you can build the appropriate protective factors in your child's life. For instance, if you know that there's addiction in your family, then you might want to recommend that your child not use alcohol for at least until they're 21, or even better yet, when they're 25, when their brains are, the bulk of that brain development has been completed. Obviously, it's a good idea for anybody to delay their use, but if you have other risk factors, then that's probably a very important thing to consider. So to sum up, once you understand risk factors, then you can erect the appropriate protective factors, as we mentioned a couple of slides ago. And that is prevention. All right, so moving along. So last fall, my colleague, Glenn Hall, he gave a presentation on vaping, and I believe that video is still available on Facebook. So if you'd like to see it, you can go there and watch it. I won't go into all the details of that presentation, but I just wanted to give a shout out that there is that presentation from last fall, and if you need help finding it, you can always contact Ray Allen. And just very quickly, what was covered was, what these products are, and there's a lot of harmful chemicals in these things that we just don't know the long-term effects of. And finally, just how addictive nicotine is in the teen brain. Because, when it comes to psychoactive drugs, they release dopamine. They release dopamine, but at very elevated levels, which produces a craving in a young person or anybody, but particularly a young person. And then over time, that affects the brain's natural ability to produce dopamine, which is why this cycle of craving and use develops and can lead to addiction. And as I mentioned before, that process can happen much quicker for young people because a psychoactive drug is a lot more powerful in their brains and produces a lot more dopamine than an adult's would. So if you'd like to learn more about that, please go back and you're welcome to go back and reference that video. And I will now move along to talk about some teen substance trends from our most recent national data, which comes from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, so NIDA, and the University of Michigan. So they actually just recently, a few months ago, released their 2020 data, and these are the trends that they found. So nicotine vaping still remains high, but thankfully that increase, that year-to-year increase that they've noticed since 2017 when they started tracking vaping has kind of leveled off. So from 2017 to 2019, we saw a double increase in teen vaping, very concerning. But from 2019 to 2020, we've seen that trend start to level off. And that's probably due to just vaping getting a lot of news coverage. And I don't know if you remember, but there were some vaping related deaths in the summer, fall of 2019. So that might have contributed to some of the understanding that, you know, this is a risky behavior, which contributed to probably less use. And I'd like to also point out this statistic on the lower right corner here. Juul use has significantly dropped amongst the older grades. And as you all know, Juul has been for the last few years the most popular vaping device out there. But before you get too excited, the researchers also found that that is because there's been an uptick when it comes to single-use devices. So Juul, as you all know, have a cartridge, is a device that you fill with cartridges that you buy, but they have these single-use devices now that are flavored. So it was sort of this like policy loophole. The flavors were banned when it came to pod delivery systems, but the companies realized, oh, well, if it's a single one-time use device, that's not a pod system. So they were able to capitalize on that and make flavors, very sweet flavors, using those devices. So there's been an uptick in the single-use disposable vapes, but a decrease in juuling. So that's something that as adults we need to be mindful of, because we may be keeping an eye out for Juul, but overlooking these disposable products that are now growing in popularity. So some promising trends when it comes to nicotine. It's not going down necessarily, but we aren't seeing that sharp increase that we saw from 2017 to 2018 to 2019. Now, when it comes to marijuana use has remained pretty steady over the last few years. But when you dig a little bit deeper into the data, the research shows that overall marijuana use has been pretty steady. However, we are seeing a decrease when it comes to smoking the plant matter, and increases in, you guessed it, vaping as well as edibles. So that's probably kind of balancing the numbers out. We're seeing a decrease in the plant matter, but increase in vaping. But when they ask the question about marijuana use, they're just referring to all kinds of marijuana use. So that is a trend that we want to be mindful of. That edibles and vaping marijuana is starting to become more popular than smoking the plant matter. And just a quick word about vaping marijuana, it's typically very concentrated and very strong in the wax or oil form. And so Obviously, strong meaning it has much higher THC concentration, and for the developing brain, that's something very risky and to be concerned about, not just for addiction, but for some of the negative consequences associated with marijuana use, like impact on learning and memory and things like that. And finally, when it comes to alcohol, alcohol has been declining almost every year for the last few decades, but that decline has kind of leveled off. So we're kind of in the same place as we are in 2020 as we were in 2019. And I have a little bit more information about alcohol when we get to the COVID specific data. So overall, pretty good news from 2020. Vaping has leveled off, alcohol still at very low rates, marijuana, still as same rates as previous years. Now, the question is, how has COVID impacted all of this? How has the COVID-19 impacted student use? So this research is very, very new. I'm very excited to share it with you. And there isn't much out there because it takes a long time to do this kind of research and collect data. But some of the research that has come out has seen is showing even further declines in teen vaping. And so that research I was referencing before, that was Monitoring the Future, which they carried out in the spring of 2020, and they had to stop it because of COVID. So they had about 11,000 surveys as opposed to their typical 40,000. And then these are independent studies that occurred during COVID. So they saw decreases in vaping. And when they surveyed students and asked them what were their reasons for stopping, either using less or stopping use, the cited reasons were fear of weakening lungs, difficulty in accessing products. So typically when it comes to vape products, there is this social element, this peer-to-peer element. That's how they typically obtain them. And lastly, one of the cited reasons was fear that parents would find out, since they're spending a lot more time at home now. And I'll talk about the implications of these results in the next slide coming up. So we are seeing decreases in vaping due to COVID and decreases in binge drinking. As you probably all know, binge drinking is a very social phenomenon when it comes to young people. There's an element of peer pressure involved in it, whether it's indirect, direct, or indirect, and it typically occurs in social atmospheres. So with the pandemic, one of the positive side effects, one of the few, is decreases in vaping and risky behaviors that typically occur in groups of people, like binge drinking. There were some increases in alcohol and marijuana, particularly students who reported feeling depressed and or fearful about the pandemic, which is understandable. Their support systems might have been cut off. They may not be normally would. They be more later from as adults in the community, we have to be really
Diana, we're losing your audio a little bit. I wonder if you turn off your video camera, if it would be a better feed. Looks like we might have lost Diana momentarily. Please bear with us with this technical difficulty. Thank you.
And
I'm going to reach out to Diana. Please hold. Thank you. My apologies for this. Diana hopefully is going to log back in. If you just bear with us for 1 second. The wonders of the internet.
I'm back.
Great, thank you.
Oh, no. All right, so will we have to start the recording again, I imagine?
I think we're still recording, so I think you can just carry on. We only lost you there about maybe 4 or 5 sentences back.
Okay, very good. And then just let me know if you can see my...
Yep, we see you and we hear you and all looks good. Thank you.
Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, where was I? So we are seeing some promises in less binge drinking due to the pandemic, but some concerning trends are an increase in alcohol and marijuana use from students who reported feeling depressed and or fearful about the pandemic. So those are students that as adults in the community, we're gonna want to make sure we check in on and do those early interventions on. All right, now for the most important part of our presentation, which is what parents can do in light of all this information that we have just given you. One of the most helpful things that an adult can do in a young person's life for substance misuse prevention is really have those frequent health-based conversations. So what that means is try to and you can start this at a very young age, as young as elementary school. At that age, you know, maybe the conversation revolves around like, what is health? What is a healthy behavior? What is a medicine? In the middle school, you can start to get into some of the details about, you know, what alcohol is. Alcohol is a powerful psychoactive drug. Start to ask them open-ended questions. So instead of just telling them the information, listen to the things that, pay attention to the things that they watch or listen to, and then ask them questions like, oh, what does that lyric mean when Future is singing, I'm sorry, not Future, but I forgot the name of the artist, but there's a song where they sing Molly, Molly Xanax, like, sorry, Molly Percocet. And it is a song by Future called Mask Off. So if you hear that song, you may ask, you know, what do you think a Percocet is? What do you think a Molly is? Why do you think he's singing about that? So that's what we mean about these like casual health-based conversations. It's not a 1 hour sit down conversation, but really 61-minute conversations that you just kind of woven into the daily fabric of your lives. And then once you're in the high school, like, you know, really making sure that you're asking those open-ended questions and really basing the conversations on health. So instead of saying, oh, that's a bad decision, framing it around, oh, you know, I don't think drinking is a very healthy thing for you to do for your brain and body at this age. So taking the morality out of the topic and really speaking from a place of health is what we mean by having these casual health-based conversations. Set clear expectations and consequences. So earlier on, I mentioned that we have that database of 130,000 student surveys. And one of the really powerful relationships that we saw from that data was that students who reported that their parents had very clear rules and expectations when it came to alcohol and drug use, those students were less likely to report alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana use. They were less likely to use, and when they used, they used in lesser amounts. You know, at FCD, we don't tell you what those expectations and rules should be. I think we think it's a very personal decision. We just recommend that you have those, and teach healthy coping skills. One of the #1 reasons that young people report using is because they're stressed. They're stressed. I don't need to tell you this, but your children, your teens are definitely stressed. And so really teaching them how to cope with life stresses, whether it's, you know, sports or mindfulness, meditation, playing with the pet, modeling, you know, how you yourself as an adult cope with stress. You know, really teaching them that they don't need to and shouldn't rely on a psychoactive drug to relieve stress, but giving them those alternatives. Get to know their friends and their friends' families. This is a very important one because you could have all the rules in your family, but if your friend is going away for the weekend with if your child is going away for the weekend with their friend's family and they have a totally different set of rules, then you know, that can perhaps undermine all of the rules that you set in your own home. So making sure to pick up that phone and call. What's the drinking situation going to be like at this gathering? And just letting your comfort level be known. Discover healthy outlets for fun and excitement. So the other reason that young people cite using drugs, one is stress and the other is to have fun. So finding those alternatives for young people to have healthy highs, to risk seek. Remember, it is ingrained in them. Like their brains are primed for risk seeking and pleasure, and so to deter them from, you know, getting that through a psychoactive drug, you really want to make sure that you find as many outlets for them as possible in other ways. Just a personal example, I really love rock climbing, and so I think I've always been a little bit of a thrill seeker. And I'm sure that part of my personality contributed to my, you know, drug experimentation and then use and then misuse. But now I get to, you know, get my thrills through being high up on that climbing wall or high up on a mountain. And it's actually where I met my husband as well. So some really great things can come out of discovering healthy and fun outlets for having fun. And also, you really want to coach technology skills, especially during this time. I don't need to tell you, but your teens are probably turning to social media and their phones a lot more than they normally would. And there's research that shows that increased screen time can actually bring about a whole host of health issues and mood problems. But at the same time, it's also what they're using right now to stay in touch with their peers. And at this age, that's also what they're primed for. They're primed to want to be with their friends and want to connect with others. So really helping, coaching them through you know, ways to use technology that are healthy and uplifting, and monitoring how they're using it is a very important thing to do right now. Setting a schedule and prioritizing sleep. You know, I'm still pretty new at this parenting thing, but I've realized that kids actually really thrive when they have a a schedule and prioritizing sleep. There's research that recently came out that a lot of kids were actually doing better during the pandemic. And one of the main reasons for that, mood-wise, and one of the big reasons for that was they were getting way more sleep. I forgot the exact numbers, but there was a very concerning amount of students getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep previously, pre-pandemic, and then post-pandemic, that number skyrocketed. Kids were suddenly getting a lot more sleep, that 7 and 8 hours of sleep that they needed, because they were, learning from home, and that contributed a lot to their elevated moods. So making sure that they're on a schedule, prioritizing sleep, are all things that you can do to prevent substance misuse. Modeling healthy attitudes and behaviors. I think we touched on this a little bit before. So modeling how you, as an adult, deal with stress, but also how are your own attitudes and behaviors when it comes to alcohol and other drug use. You can have all the talks and all the rules, but if there is some contradiction in the way that you're using alcohol in the home, that's not necessarily, a bad thing. That's not to say you can't have wine with meals, but you want to consider what kind of message you're sending through your own use, particularly during this time of COVID. So one of the the data that's coming out is showing that adult substance use, particularly alcohol use, has increased during COVID. And it's not to say that that's a bad thing for an unhealthy thing for your child, but it is something that you're going to want to be mindful of, or at least if that is occurring, being sure to have those conversations about why it's different for an adult to be drinking versus a child. Practicing that active listening and reflecting. So when you are having those health-based conversations, using language like, "Oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that." Instead of like, "That's ridiculous. Why would you even think that?" So being curious, reflecting back what you're hearing. "Oh, I'm hearing that you're really stressed, and that's why you've been vaping. Like, tell me more about this stress that really concerns me when it comes to your health. I really want to help you." So, and that involves keeping your own emotions in check when you're having these conversations. So if you feel that you're getting activated by some of these conversations, then sometimes it's a good idea to just table it for a better time, or say something like, "This is really hard for both of us. Why don't we talk about this at a later time? I love you." So so just checking in on yourself and where you are when you're having these conversations. And lastly, seeking professional help. This is a tough topic. It's a tough topic even for adults to deal with. So if a young person is using, then it's really a good idea to seek out those professional resources. So when it comes to vaping, I'll have it on the next slide, but there are these wonderful youth-centered texting programs for smoking cessation, and it's on their phones, so it appeals to young people because they can actually get support just through text. And this one particular one from the Truth Initiative has had a lot of success. So whether it's getting help through an app or through a counselor or through other healthcare professionals, there's no shame when it comes to this topic. It is a health issue, and the earlier we can intervene on concerning behaviors, the more we can prevent all of the unhealthy outcomes that could potentially come with substance misuse and addiction. So finally, before we get to Q&A, here are some resources that I'd like to share with you. Please follow us on Facebook. You can go to our website and subscribe to our newsletter. We have a really wonderful prevention e-journal that comes out like every 2 or 3 weeks on trending topics and you know, how adults can stay involved in prevention. We recently had one on teen use during COVID, and we're coming out with some other exciting ones over the next couple of weeks. So subscribe to us. And these are 2 wonderful resources where we get a lot of our evidence-based information: Stanford Tobacco Prevention Toolkit, NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and finally, Truth Initiative's This Is Quitting. There unfortunately aren't too many vaping cessation resources, particularly for young people right now, but this is one of the ones that that we have checked out as an organization and has had some pretty impressive success rates for, and it's tailored specifically to young people. So that is what I have for our presentation this evening. I'm really sorry about the technological glitches, and I hope that it was informative nonetheless, and I'm happy here. I'm happy at this point to answer any questions you may have for me at this time. It could be a personal question. It could be one on anything related to alcohol and drug use, misuse, and prevention. So thank you for having me. And with that, I'll turn it to you, Mary, for any questions from the audience. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Diana. So as Diana mentioned, we welcome any and all questions. You can type them into the question panel. There are no current questions coming in, but Diana, I know one question we get all the time from parents, and you referred to this a little bit earlier, is the differences in different families' expectations related to drinking or using, particularly alcohol, and how do you sort of have those conversations with your child when their friends' parents have different expectations? And part 2, how do you have that conversation with that parent? It can be an awkward thing to talk about. What would you recommend in covering that with other parents?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think I mentioned earlier that you know, when it comes to the research shows that the younger you are when you start drinking, the higher the risk. And sometimes parents will tell us, but, you know, I started drinking, you know, when I was earlier, when I was, you know, at an early age, and I'm fine. Or, you know, parents would tell us, you know, my kid drinks a little bit with me, but, you know, they seem to be perfectly fine. And, you know, I think it's a very personal choice. Like, all we can really offer as an organization is what the evidence says. There's no evidence that says, you know, drinking at an earlier age is protective. It's true that, you know, some people who drink at an earlier age won't go on to have problems. You know, it's, you know, substance misuse is not a condition that affects everybody. It's, like I said, you know, 40% of people who start at 15. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's because they started drinking young that was why they didn't have any problems. And so I know I'm taking a long roundabout way of answering your question, but I think that a parent has to do what feels right for their particular family based on, you know, their family's beliefs, principles, culture, the personality of the child. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, if the child has a lot of those risk factors, then it's probably a really good idea to say, you know, no drinking and other drug use for a long time. But again, it's a very personal decision. And I think that, you know, you have to talk about it as a family and feel comfortable with the choices that you make as a family, and you know, feel comfortable sharing that with other families and giving your reasons for doing that in a health-based way, you know, stripping any morality from it. So, you know, nothing about this, it's a bad decision, or you know, but really talking from a place of health, like, hey, you know, I'm not really sure what, you know, how alcohol is treated in your home, but in our home, you know, we really have a zero tolerance policy, and these are the reasons, you know, these are the reasons we believe in that. And I hope that you can, you know, do your best to help my child succeed in that, no matter what your beliefs are around it. So I think it's tricky, but really think about the reasons for why you think about how you feel about it, and you know, what you would want for your child, and the reasons to support that, and find a way to talk about it in a health-based way is what I would recommend when dealing with other families.
Great. Thank you, Diana, for answering that. We have another question that I know we hear a lot also, and that is, what does FCD feel, how does the FCD feel about the legalization of recreational and medical marijuana?
Yeah, that is one that we get a lot. Well, we like to say that the teen brain is a teen brain is a teen brain, and that's the same whether you are in California or Utah or Amsterdam or Dubai, places that we all work. And what I mean by that is, no matter what the laws are regarding the use of a psychoactive drug, the teen brain is going to be more vulnerable to a psychoactive drug. And so we always, from the prevention perspective, want to emphasize the health impact of a drug, no matter what the laws are or the changing landscape is. And when it comes to recreational marijuana, you know, like, I think, like alcohol, if you're an adult, there are ways to use it, you know, responsibly. There are also ways to use it in a high risk way. When it comes to medical marijuana, you know, it has its valid medical purposes. It also has side effects, which is why smoking marijuana has not been studied in any, it hasn't been approved because it hasn't passed any real double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled tests, because it hurts the lungs and it gets you high in the process. And so I think that it's a very complicated topic, and we sometimes, you know, when we have the time, we go into it. We get into it with students in our student sessions. But the simple answer is that whether it's legalized, whether it's recreational, whether it's medical, it's still a psychoactive drug. And in a teen brain, that always entails a certain level of risk. Thanks for the question, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. And we do have time for one more question, and this is always a good one to respond to as well. My daughter has some friends who might be in trouble with alcohol or possibly other substances. What can she do? What can I do as a parent?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing that would be helpful is to really understand the signs of a substance misuse disorder developing. And you know, those signs can be using more than intended to, trying to cut back but not being able to, the substance use affecting one's day-to-day responsibilities, you know, not being able to meet obligations. And the reason I say these things is a lot of times we don't know, what a substance problem looks like. We have a feeling that something's not really right, but then once we understand like what the signs are, then we can speak about it from a more informed place and a health-based place. So you may want to coach your daughter in saying something to her friend like, hey, I noticed you've been using more than you used to. When we went out with those friends, you said you were just going to do it, try marijuana vaping that one time, but now it seems like, you got your own vape and you're doing it a little bit more and more. I'm wondering if, are you able to cut back if you wanted to? Like, so understanding what the signs are and then expressing your concern in a way that's health-based, not non-judgmental, and saying things like, are you okay? If something's going on, you can talk to me. So really help, like trying to coach your daughter through that language can be really helpful. And it's tough. It's tough. I think even adult to adult, these conversations are really hard to have. But if you feel comfortable, you can even share that information with the other person's parents. Like, I'm sure as a parent, if this was happening to your own child, you probably would really appreciate that information. And I know that can be very, very hard, especially if your child's like, don't say anything. You cannot say anything. So that's something that, I think you're going to have to grapple with a little bit as an adult, how to navigate. But I've heard parents use adults in the school community for that. So talking to a counselor or another trusted adult in the school community, so that's not really coming from that particular family, but perhaps just somebody expressing a concern that about a particular student. Some schools actually have those systems set up in place, an early intervention system where people can make referrals anonymously, but that's not always the case. So I think it's tough, but really helping the child understand that the friend is not a bad person for doing this. The friend may not even, be addicted, right? Like, addiction is a process, but they could be going down that path. And, we really want to encourage and empower our young people to speak up if they are afraid that, it could be developing into a problem, and help them with that language and help them with identifying what those signs might be, would be my best recommendation. Thanks for the question, Mary.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Diana. And thanks to all of you for attending. We'll be sending this recording on to Ray Allen, who will share it with everyone who can share it with everyone who's interested. So thank you to everyone in the audience. Thank you to Ray Allen for organizing this. And thanks to Diana. And we wish you all a very good night.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody.
Great job, Diana.
Thank you. Take care.